What's the difference between loose powder and pressed powder, and what is baking? For reference, a loose powder would be something like this, like the Huda Beauty Easy Bake Powder, Laura Mercier, One Size, anything that is literally loose in a container. Pressed powder would be something more like the Charlotte Tilbury pressed powder. I'm sure you've seen this one before. The most easiest answer I can give you is one is loose and one is pressed. To be a little more specific, depending on what the powder is going to do for you is really what differentiates all of them from each other. For example, just because it's a loose setting powder doesn't mean that it can't provide what a pressed powder does. To be more scientific, typically there are a lot more ingredients specifically used when pressing powders. I don't want to dive in too deep, even though I love talking about it. Pressed powder is going to require more in the formula that helps it bind together, stay together, and not crack over time. Like when you're baking and you make a cupcake and, you know, that cupcake is either going to come out nice and moist or it's going to be really dry. Typically, pressed powders have a little bit more going on in the lab when it comes to pressing them. But like I mentioned, I don't want to dive too deep. If you're getting a powder for a specific reason, it's going to do that. You can buy a loose powder that says it's going to blur, it's going to set your makeup, it's going to give you a flawless finish. And you can buy a pressed powder that can claim all of those things and do all of those things for you. It really comes down to preference. Now, I think what you should be looking for is, do you want a setting powder, a finishing powder, a translucent powder, or even a blotting powder? Those are kind of like the key words that I think that are most important. I use the Huda Beauty powder when I am going to set my concealer and add powders to the rest of my face. So I put this on and then I do my powder blush, my powder bronzer. Once I've let that kind of sit on my face after a while, then I go in with a setting spray. Then, depending on what type of look I'm going for, if I do a full face, I always typically will go in last with the Charlotte Tilbury Flawless Setting Powder. The reason I go in with this one last is because it is a finishing powder. So what this is going to do for me is just further add coverage, but also that powder blurred finish. And same thing with the Sephora Collection powder. Typically, I will use this all over my face when I'm done with my makeup. But usually when I use this, I don't use the Huda powder. I just use it for an all-over natural finish. That's kind of more so what baked powders will do for you. They'll give you more of a satin natural finish as opposed to a very matte and blurred look. Baking, I saved for last because I do not do that. For me personally, I think baking has two things that it mainly does. The most popular ways that it's used is to essentially layer under your eyes and help brighten and essentially try to absorb as much oils as possible that may be coming through on your makeup. Even though I'm oily, I don't do that because I tend to be a little more dry under my eyes. The other reason I personally would use baking is if I decide to change up my eye look and I need to add eyeshadows or anything on top, then I would use baking under my eyes just in case I get fallout, so then I can just wipe that. No matter how you use any of these products, it is going to be specific to you. Just because you see someone baking with a loose powder or someone adding a pressed powder with a powder puff, it doesn't mean you have to. It also means that you should experiment and try different things because you never know what's going to work for you.